You don't belong in this cabin, dear. It's for paying customers. Now, move along before you make things unpleasant for everyone." The words, laced with the casual cruelty of inherited wealth, sliced through the quiet hum of the aircraft. They were the words that would unravel the legacy of a titan of industry, end the career of a decorated police officer, and cost an airline a fortune it didn't know it couldn't afford to lose. The incident began as a simple seating dispute on Apex Air's flagship Flight 7117 from Boston to San Francisco. It would end with the entire North American fleet of the airline grounded, its CEO begging on a conference call, and a viral video that laid bare the rot of prejudice festering in the highest echelons of society. When 19-year-old Elara Vance refused to surrender her seat to the wife of a powerful senator, the authorities who were summoned saw only a defiant, out-of-place young woman. They didn't realize they were attempting to strong-arm the one person on the plane who understood the intricate mechanics of the very machine they were standing in. And they certainly didn't know they were declaring war on the man who held the patents to the alloy in its wings. This is the story of how a single phone call didn't just halt a flight. It exposed a fatal flaw, both in a machine and in the men who operated it. The interior of the Apex Air Starliner was a symphony of beige leather and brushed aluminum, a sterile cocoon designed to insulate its first-class passengers from the realities of air travel. The scent was a carefully curated blend of chamomile and new carpet, a fragrance meant to soothe the anxieties of the powerful. For Elara Vance, however, it was a scent she associated with stress, the smell of flying to another competition, another academic decathlon, another lonely hotel room. She was curled into Suite 1A, a private pod with its own sliding door and a seat that reclined into a fully flat bed. Her oversized MIT sweatshirt, frayed at the cuffs, and the faded jeans she wore were a stark contrast to the cashmere throws and polished wood veneer of her surroundings. Her thick, curly hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and a pair of noise-cancelling headphones sat around her neck, temporarily silent. On the tray table in front of her lay not a novel or a tablet, but a complex schematic diagram of a GE 9X turbofan engine, which she was annotating with a fine-tipped technical pen. To any casual observer, she was a college kid who'd stumbled into the wrong section of the plane. She did not look like the daughter of Marcus Vance, the reclusive genius behind Vance Aeronautics, a man whose innovations were embedded in nearly every commercial aircraft built in the last 20 years. The flight attendants, trained to recognize wealth through the glint of a Patek Philippe or the cut of a Brioni suit, had offered her a perfunctory glass of orange juice, and then largely ignored her. Elara preferred it that way. Anonymity was a shield. She was returning from a National Aerospace Engineering Symposium, where she had presented a paper on detecting metal fatigue through sonic resonance analysis, a paper that had won her the top prize and the quiet admiration of industry professionals. She had insisted on flying commercial, much to her father's security team's chagrin. She found the low, constant vibration of a commercial airliner meditative. It was a place where she could think. But tranquility, she was about to be reminded, is a fragile commodity. The disruption began not with a shout, but with a sigh of theatrical exasperation. "Charles, honestly, I don't understand the difficulty. I am booked for 1A. My husband's office confirmed it this morning." The voice was imperious, accustomed to immediate compliance. Elara didn't look up, hoping the minor turbulence of another passenger's entitlement would pass her by. It did not. Standing in the aisle was Genevieve Blackwood. She was a woman sculpted by privilege, her silver hair styled into a helmet of immovable perfection. Her cream-colored St. John knit suit was immaculate, her pearls lustrous, her face a carefully maintained mask of polite disdain. She was the wife of Senator Alistair Blackwood, a man whose political influence was as vast as his family's fortune. Trailing her was a flight attendant named Clara, a young woman whose professional smile was beginning to fray at the edges. "Mrs. Blackwood, I do apologize," Clara said, her voice strained. "I see your request in the system, but the seat was assigned to this passenger. We have you in 2A, an identical suite just across the aisle." Genevieve Blackwood's gaze fell upon Ilara. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, performed a swift, brutal calculus. They scanned the worn sweatshirt, the technical diagram, the scuffed sneakers, and lingered for a fraction of a second too long on Ilara's olive skin. In Genevieve's rigidly ordered world, a young woman who looked like Ilara did not sit in 1A. She served drinks in 1A. "You," Genevieve said, the word not a question but a command. "You're in my seat." Ilara finally looked up, her dark, intelligent eyes meeting the older woman's icy stare. She slowly took a sip of her water, a small act of defiance that did not go unnoticed. "I believe you're mistaken," Ilara said, her voice quiet but clear. She gestured to her phone, where her digital boarding pass was displayed. "My ticket is for 1A. "Impossible," Genevieve scoffed, her voice rising. She turned her fury on Clara. "This is a first-class cabin, not a Greyhound bus. Did you check her credentials? Is she an employee? Perhaps she's a non-revenue passenger who should be bumped." The implication was clear. Ilara was there on a technicality, a charity case occupying space meant for her betters. Clara, visibly intimidated, turned to Ilara. "Ma'am, I am so sorry to ask, but would you mind if I just scanned your pass again? Just to clear up the confusion for Mrs. Blackwood." Ilara didn't argue. She simply held up her phone. The scanner beeped, and the screen on Clara's tablet confirmed it. "Vance, Ilara, seat 1A, paid fare, full." Clara let out a shaky breath. "She is in the correct seat, Mrs. Blackwood. Please let me show you to 2A. We need to prepare for departure." Genevieve's face tightened, the polite mask cracking to reveal the granite beneath. "I am the wife of a United States Senator. I have flown over 3 million miles with this airline. I will not be dictated to by a computer error and some diversity hire who was given a sympathy ticket." The cabin, which had been filled with the low murmur of conversation, fell silent. The insult, both classist and racist, hung in the recycled air like toxic fumes. Ilara's hand, which had been steady, clenched slightly on her pen, leaving a small ink smudge on the schematic. She had heard variations of this her entire life. The surprise, the suspicion, the quiet assumption that she could not possibly have earned her place. "Ma'am," Ilara said, her voice losing its earlier softness and taking on a metallic edge. "I paid for this seat. I am sitting in this seat. Now you are blocking the aisle and delaying the flight." Genevieve gasped, a theatrical gesture of a woman who had never been spoken to in such a manner. "How dare you? You insolent little girl! Do you have any idea who I am?" "I know that you're the woman standing in the aisle of a plane that is supposed to be taking off," Ilara replied flatly. "And frankly, I don't care about anything else." That was the tipping point. For Genevieve Blackwood, it was no longer about the seat. It was about hierarchy. It was about putting this upstart, this anomaly, back in her place. "Get the purser," she commanded Clara. "Get the captain. I want security. This passenger has become aggressive and threatening. I feel unsafe." "Threatening you?" Ilara countered, raising an eyebrow. "I haven't moved from my seat. You're the one shouting." "I am being harassed!" Genevieve shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that made other passengers wince. "I want her removed from this flight. I want the police." Clara, completely out of her depth, fumbled for the interphone to call the lead purser. The situation was escalating with the terrifying speed of an engine fire. The purser, a man named Mr. Davies with a weary expression and 20 years of service, arrived to find Genevieve in full-blown hysterics, and Ilara sitting silently, watching the scene unfold with an unnerving calm. "What seems to be the issue?" Davies asked, adopting a placating tone. "The issue," Genevieve spat, "is that this person is in a seat that was reserved for me, and she is refusing to cooperate with the crew. She has a hostile attitude, and I want her off this plane." Davies glanced at Ilara. He saw a teenager in a hoodie. He looked at Genevieve. He saw the wife of a powerful politician, a woman whose complaints could end careers. He made a swift, pragmatic calculation. "Miss," Davies said to Ilara, his tone dripping with condescension, "I'm sure we can resolve this. As a gesture of goodwill for the mix-up, we would be happy to move you to another excellent suite and offer you a travel voucher for your trouble." "No," Ilara said, cutting him off. Davies blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no," Ilara repeated, her voice firm. "I am not moving. I will not be bribed into accommodating a woman who just insulted me in front of this entire cabin. Your job is to handle the disruptive passenger, Mr. Davies. And that would be Mrs. Blackwood." Davies's face flushed. He was not accustomed to being corrected by someone who looked like she should be in coach. His professional veneer cracked. "Miss, if you refuse a direct instruction from the flight crew, I will have no choice but to involve the captain and airport security. It would be much easier for everyone if you would just cooperate." "Call them," Genevieve said with a triumphant smirk. "Let's see how cooperative she is when she's talking to a man with a badge." Ilara leaned back in her seat, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It was analysis, as if she were calculating the trajectory of a failing rocket. She picked up her technical pen again. "By all means," she said softly. "Call them." Davies retreated to the galley and made the call. "Captain, we have a passenger in 1A refusing crew instructions, requesting port authority officers to the gate." He used the industry-standard phrase, the one that absolved the airline of nuance and responsibility. Refusing crew instructions was the magic incantation that transformed a paying customer into a security threat. 10 minutes later, 2 Port Authority police officers boarded the plane. One was young, his face a mask of nervous professionalism. The other was Officer Frank Kincaid. Kincaid was a man who walked with the heavy certainty of someone who believes the world is a simple place of good guys and bad guys, and he was always on the right side. He had a thick neck, a bristling mustache, and eyes that had long ago stopped seeing people and started seeing potential perps. He saw Genevieve Blackwood dabbing at her dry eyes with a linen handkerchief. "Thank heavens, officer," she said, clutching his arm. "She's right there. She's been completely unreasonable. She threatened me." Kincaid looked at Genevieve, wealthy, white, distraught. Then he looked into Suite 1A and saw Ilara. He didn't need to hear her side of the story. The narrative had already been written for him 1,000 times before. He strode down the aisle, his boots heavy on the plush carpet. "All right, miss, let's go," Kincaid barked, stopping directly in front of her pod. "You're holding up the flight. Time to get off." Ilara looked up slowly. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that the captain wants you off," Kincaid said, his hand resting on his belt near his sidearm. "Now, are you going to walk off, or do I have to carry you off? Your choice." "I have a valid ticket for this seat," Ilara stated, her voice trembling slightly with a surge of adrenaline. "This woman has been harassing me, and your airline's crew is enabling her." I don't care about your ticket, Kincaid sneered. This is private property. When they say you gotta go, you gotta go. Now get up. Am I being detained? Ilara asked, her mind racing, recalling the legal briefings her father's security chief had insisted she memorize. You're about 5 seconds from being arrested for trespassing and interfering with a flight crew, Kincaid said, enjoying himself. So I suggest you move. I need to make a phone call, Ilara said. Kincaid let out a short, harsh laugh. You don't get a phone call. This isn't a TV show. Now stand up and put your hands behind your back. He reached for a pair of zip-tie cuffs on his belt. If you are detaining me, I have the right to contact my legal counsel, Ilara said, her voice growing stronger, colder. Legal counsel, Kincaid chuckled, playing to the audience in the cabin. Who you gonna call? Your public defender? Look, kid, I've dealt with your type before. You think you can talk your way out of everything? My type? Ilara asked, her eyes narrowing. Yeah, your type. The entitled brats who think the rules don't apply to them, Kincaid said, his words dripping with contempt. Where'd you get the money for a ticket like this anyway? Daddy's credit card? The cabin was thick with a suffocating silence. Even Genevieve Blackwood seemed to realize the officer had gone too far, but she remained quiet, a pleased smirk playing on her lips. I am reaching for my phone, Ilara said, her movements slow and deliberate. It is in my pocket. Keep your hands where I can see them, Kincaid shouted, his hand dropping to his taser. I am calling my father, Ilara said, her gaze locked on the officer's eyes. I promise you, if you lay a hand on me before I finish this call, the consequences will be significant. There was a chilling certainty in her voice, an absolute conviction that gave Kincaid a moment's pause. It was just a flicker of doubt, but it was enough. Ilara pulled out her phone. She didn't search through her contacts. She pressed a single icon on her home screen, a simple black square with a white V. It rang once. Ilara. The voice that came through the speaker was not loud, but it had a resonant depth that seemed to vibrate through the floor of the plane. It was the voice of a man used to absolute command. Dad, Ilara said, and for the first time, a hint of vulnerability crept into her tone. I'm on Apex Flight 719 at Logan. We haven't left the gate. I know. I'm tracking the flight path. The departure was scheduled for 10 minutes ago. What's wrong? There's a passenger, Genevieve Blackwood, and a Port Authority officer, Frank Kincaid, Ilara said, her eyes still fixed on the officer. They're trying to remove me from my seat. He's accusing me of trespassing. He's threatening to arrest me. A profound, heavy silence emanated from the phone. It was not the silence of disconnection, but of a vast and terrible machine spooling up to full power. Put Officer Kincaid on the phone, the voice said, its calm more menacing than any shout. Kincaid scoffed. I'm not talking to her daddy. Put him on the phone, now. The command boomed from the small speaker, sharp and absolute, making several passengers jump. Ilara held the phone out. Kincaid, feeling a sudden, inexplicable chill, leaned in. Yeah, this is Officer Kincaid. Who is this? Officer Kincaid, the voice said, deadly calm. My name is Marcus Vance. I am the founder and CEO of Vance Aeronautics. My company designs and manufactures the composite fuselage and the proprietary alloy for the turbine blades used in the engines of the very aircraft you are currently standing in. Apex Air is not just my biggest customer. They are my partners. They lease their entire Starliner fleet from a holding company that I own. Kincaid's face went slack. The name Vance was legendary in Boston's tech and manufacturing circles. It was a name that meant billions. So what? Kincaid blustered, his bravado crumbling. "You think you're above the law?" "No, officer," Marcus Vance said. "I think I am the law in this context. You are standing on my property, threatening my daughter. A few moments ago, I activated a remote diagnostic protocol. Look out the window." Kincaid, Genevieve, and half the passengers turned to look out the windows. On the tarmac, a team of ground crew who had been preparing the plane for pushback suddenly stopped. One of them, the supervisor, looked at his tablet, his eyes widening. He spoke urgently into his radio, and the entire crew began to back away from the aircraft, taking their equipment with them. The jet bridge operator looked at a flashing red light on his console and began preparing to retract the bridge. "That was a safety override," Marcus Vance's voice explained from the phone. "I have just flagged this specific aircraft, serial number 717 Alpha Niner, as structurally unsound pending a full engineering review. No pilot will fly it. No ground crew will touch it. This plane is now a very expensive, very stationary metal tube." The captain, a distinguished man named Robert Henderson, burst out of the cockpit, his face ashen. "What in God's name is going on?" he demanded of the purser. "I just got a fleet-wide no-fly order from Apex Corporate for this specific tail number. They said it came directly from Vance Aeronautics." "There's more, Officer Kincaid," Marcus continued, his voice relentless. "My call has also triggered a clause in my contract with Apex Air. All outstanding payments for their fleet are now due in full, effective immediately. I estimate that will be around $900 million. I suspect the CEO of Apex, a man named David Corrigan, will be calling the airport manager momentarily to inquire why a single police officer has just triggered the potential bankruptcy of his airline." The silence in the cabin was now absolute, broken only by the faint, panicked squawking from the captain's radio. Genevieve Blackwood was as pale as her pearls. Officer Kincaid was sweating, his face a mottled red. He was no longer a cop dealing with a troublesome kid. He was a man who had accidentally kicked a hornet's nest the size of a city. "You have two options, officer," Marcus Vance said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You can apologize to my daughter, escort Mrs. Blackwood off my plane, and pray that I do not decide to file a civil rights lawsuit that will personally ruin you. Or you can continue on your current path, and I will not only dismantle your career, but I will also enjoy a pleasant afternoon dismantling this entire airline, piece by expensive piece. The choice is yours." Officer Kincaid stared at the phone in Ilara's hand as if it were a bomb. He looked at the young woman he had insulted and threatened. He saw her not as a type anymore, but as the calm, quiet center of a hurricane that was about to obliterate his world. He had made a catastrophic miscalculation, and the bill had just come due. The weight of Marcus Vance's ultimatum settled over the first-class cabin like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. Captain Henderson, now understanding the cataclysmic scale of the situation, strode over to Kincaid, his face a thunderous mask. "Officer," Henderson said, his voice low and shaking with fury, "give me the phone." Kincaid, looking dazed, handed it over. "Mr. Vance, this is Captain Henderson. I want to apologize profusely for this unacceptable situation. I had no idea." "Save it, Captain," Marcus's voice cut through, devoid of warmth. "Your ignorance is not an excuse. Your crew allowed a passenger to be harassed and then escalated the situation by calling law enforcement instead of doing their jobs. Your purser tried to bribe my daughter into submission. You are the commander of this aircraft. This failure is yours." "Yes, sir." "I understand, sir," Henderson stammered, humbled. "What do you need me to do?" "First, you will remove Officer Kincaid and Mrs. Blackwood from this plane. Not ask them to leave." Remove them. Second, you will wait for my instructions. Do not move. Do not attempt to deplane the other passengers. Do nothing. Henderson turned, his authority finally reasserting itself, now aimed at the correct targets. Officer Kincaid, your presence is no longer required. You are officially interfering with the safety and operation of this flight. Deplane. Now. Kincaid's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He looked at Genevieve Blackwood with undisguised hatred. She was the one who had started this, but he knew he would be the one to pay the price. Without another word, he turned and stomped off the plane, his career evaporating with every step. Henderson then faced Genevieve, his expression glacial. "Mrs. Blackwood, collect your belongings. You are being denied carriage." "You can't do this," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "My husband is Senator Blackwood. There will be hearings. I will have your license." "Ma'am," Henderson said, stepping closer, his sheer size intimidating. "Your husband does not sign my paycheck, but the man on that phone, in a manner of speaking, does. Get off my plane." Defeated, humiliated, and utterly alone, Genevieve Blackwood snatched her crocodile skin handbag and, without a glance at anyone, fled down the jet bridge. The other passengers watched her go, their earlier annoyance at the delay replaced by a stunned, vicarious satisfaction. The immediate threats were gone, but the tension remained. The plane was still grounded. The ground crew was still keeping its distance. Elara finally ended the call with her father, who promised he was en route. She leaned her head back against the seat, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving a weary ache in its place. It was then that she noticed it again. The thing that had been nagging at the edge of her senses before the chaos erupted. It was a smell, faint and acrid, barely perceptible beneath the cabin's engineered fragrance. It smelled like heated glycol, and there was a vibration. Not the steady hum of the auxiliary power unit, but a subtle, intermittent shudder coming from the floor beneath her feet, near the wing root. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument for diagnosing mechanical anomalies, began to churn. Heated glycol could mean a hydraulic fluid leak. The shudder could be a pump, struggling, cycling improperly. The flight crew had done their pre-flight checks, of course, but her prize-winning paper had been about how standard checks can miss hairline fractures that only become apparent under specific thermal or pressure stress. Stress like a fully fueled plane sitting on a hot tarmac. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, walking to the galley where Captain Henderson and the purser, Mr. Davies, were having a hushed, panicked conversation. "Captain," Elara said, her voice cutting through their discussion. Henderson turned, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Vance, again, I am so sorry. We are awaiting instructions from your father." "It's not about that anymore," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I think there's a problem with the plane. A real one." Davies the purser rolled his eyes, a flicker of his earlier arrogance returning. "Miss, the aircraft is perfectly fine. The only problem was the disturbance." "No," Elara insisted, ignoring him and focusing on the captain. "I smell heated hydraulic fluid, and I can feel a vibration in the port-side hydraulic pump system. It's inconsistent. It feels like cavitation." Henderson stared at her. He saw a 19-year-old girl, not an engineer. "Young lady, with all due respect, our instruments show everything is green. We ran a full diagnostic." "Your instruments measure pressure and temperature," Elara countered, her confidence growing as she entered her area of expertise. "They don't measure sonic resonance. A hairline fracture in a primary actuator line wouldn't show up as a pressure drop until it was too late. But it would change the frequency of the vibration from the pump. You need to get a maintenance crew to physically inspect the number 3 hydraulic actuator in the port wing flap assembly. The specificity of her statement gave Henderson pause. She wasn't just saying, "Something feels weird." She was naming components. Still, protocol was protocol. "I appreciate your concern, Miss Vance, but I can't ground a plane based on a passenger's feeling." "It's not a feeling," Ilara said, her voice hardening. "It's a diagnosis." Just then, her phone rang. It was her father. She put him on speaker. "Ilara, I'm 5 minutes out. My team is meeting me at the gate. Is everything all right?" "They got rid of the officer and Mrs. Blackwood," Ilara said. "But Dad, there's something else. I think there's a hydraulic leak on this plane." The chief engineer's words hung in the fuel-scented air, heavier than the starliner that loomed beside them. Worst case, well, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The phrase echoed in the cavern of Ilara's mind, a stark, simple statement of an annihilation that had been averted by a smell, a vibration, and a stubborn refusal to be erased. Captain Henderson, a man whose entire identity was built on composure and command, sagged against a baggage cart as if his own internal framework had buckled. The ghost of 200 silent screams passed across his face. Marcus Vance's arm was a steel band around Ilara's shoulders, a familiar anchor in a world that had just tilted on its axis. He whispered, "You did good, kid," his voice thick with a terror she had never heard in it before. It was the sound of a man who builds impenetrable fortresses, realizing his most precious treasure had been standing in an open field all along. Ilara didn't reply. She couldn't. Her gaze was locked on the flawed piece of tubing in the engineer's hand. It was so small, so insignificant. A tiny, treacherous crack, a microscopic lie in a system of supposed truths. She had spent her life learning the language of machines, the elegant syntax of physics. She understood stress and torsion, resonance and fatigue. But this was different. This was the cold, hard grammar of mortality. She had argued over a seat, a small rectangle of personal space, while a far more absolute void had been waiting just beneath the floorboards. The victory over Genevieve Blackwood, over Officer Kincaid, felt like a child's game played on the lip of a volcano. It was meaningless. What mattered was this small, cracked tube. It was the only truth in the entire universe at that moment. The drive back to the city was a vacuum of unspoken thoughts. The familiar leather scent of her father's Maybach, usually a comfort, felt suffocating. Marcus drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw a hard line of tension. The city lights of Boston blurred past the window, a world blissfully unaware of the catastrophe that hadn't happened. "They're going to want to talk to you," Marcus said finally, his voice unnaturally flat. "The NTSB, the FAA, everyone." Ilara just nodded, watching the reflection of her own face in the dark glass. A stranger looked back at her, a girl with haunted eyes, suddenly years older than the one who had boarded Flight 717 that morning. "I broke them, you know," Marcus continued, not looking at her. "Apex. I made one call and shattered the foundations of a $30 billion company. The CEO, Corrigan, he called me. He was practically weeping, begging. There was no triumph in his voice, only a profound weariness. I built my life on creating systems, Ilara. Systems of leverage, of control, to protect you. And today all of it was useless until the very last moment. All that power, and I couldn't stop one woman from humiliating you, or one cop from threatening you." He finally glanced at her, his eyes filled with a raw, painful vulnerability. "The only thing that mattered today was you. Not my name, not my company. Just you, in that seat, noticing something everyone else missed. "You didn't ground a plane, Dad," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "You pulled a pin on a grenade you'd already placed in their boardroom." The raw, brutal efficiency of his power had saved her, but it also terrified her. It was a force of nature he could unleash at will, and she was now inextricably linked to it. She wasn't just Alara Vance, the engineering student. She was Alara Vance, the girl who could bring an airline to its knees. The weight of that new identity felt heavier than the grounded Starliner. In the weeks that followed, the world fractured into two distinct realities. The first was the public inferno. Her face was everywhere, a still frame from a passenger's video. Calm, defiant, her chin slightly raised. She became a meme, a symbol, a hashtag. Seat taken, Vance vengeance. She was an unwilling icon for every person who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or judged on sight. Pundits debated her, articles lionized her, and her inbox filled with thousands of messages from strangers who projected their own struggles and triumphs onto her image. She felt like a ghost, haunting her own life, watching a fictional character named Alara Vance perform heroic deeds, while she, the real Alara, lay awake at night, listening for the phantom shudder of a failing pump, her dreams filled with the acrid smell of heated glycol and the high, thin scream of tearing metal. The second reality was a quiet, sterile world of federal investigations. She sat for hours in windowless conference rooms with sober-faced engineers from the NTSB. Here, she wasn't a viral hero. She was a witness, an expert. She wasn't emotional. She was precise. She walked them through the sequence of sensations, translating her intuition into the cold, hard data of fluid dynamics and material science. She drew diagrams from memory, quoted formulas from her own prize-winning paper, and explained how the specific frequency of the pump's cavitation would resonate differently through the fuselage depending on fuel load and ambient temperature. One of the lead investigators, a grizzled veteran named Chen, who had initially regarded her with polite skepticism, sat back in his chair after her third day of testimony. "In 30 years, he said, his voice gravelly with awe, "I've seen pilots save planes with incredible skill. I've seen maintenance crews find needles in haystacks, but I have never ever seen a disaster averted by someone who could hear a hairline fracture through 3 inches of composite flooring. Your father didn't save that plane, Miss Vance. You did." In that room, surrounded by people who spoke her language, she felt a flicker of the person she used to be, the girl who loved the elegant certainty of numbers, who found beauty in the structural integrity of a wing. It was a temporary reprieve. The moment she stepped outside, she was the hashtag again. The public fallout for the others was swift and brutal. Genevieve Blackwood vanished from the society pages, her name a toxic asset. Her husband, the senator, found his political capital had evaporated overnight. Prejudice, it turned out, polled poorly. Genevieve was trapped in a prison of her own making, the silent, opulent rooms of her Georgetown mansion, a constant reminder of a world that no longer wanted her. She hadn't just lost a seat on a plane. She had been ejected from her own life. Officer Frank Kincaid's ruin was less gilded. Fired and facing a civil rights lawsuit that would consume what little he had, he became a bitter, invisible man. He had built his identity on a foundation of simple authority, of sorting the world into good guys and bad guys. To find himself so irrevocably cast as the villain in a story seen by millions broke something deep inside him. He was a man adrift in a sea of his own making, haunted by a single, condescending laugh he'd aimed at a girl who held the world in her hands. 3 months after the incident, Alara received an email from an unfamiliar address. It was from Robert Henderson, the captain of Flight 717. He didn't offer excuses. He just asked if she would be willing to meet him for coffee. She agreed, choosing a small, anonymous cafe near the MIT campus, a place where she was just another student. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper. He had been cleared of any professional wrongdoing. He had followed protocol, but his own judgment had condemned him. "I've flown for 25 years, he began, stirring a sugar packet he had no intention of using into his black coffee. "I've landed in hurricanes, dealt with engine failures over the Atlantic, and talked down hysterical passengers. I thought I'd seen it all. I thought my instincts were sharp." He looked up, his gaze direct and filled with a humility she hadn't seen on the plane. "But when I looked at you that day, I didn't see a passenger in distress. I saw a problem to be managed, a kid in a hoodie. My training, my experience, all of it taught me to trust my instruments, to trust the crew, to trust the uniform. It never taught me to trust the person everyone else had decided didn't belong." He leaned forward slightly. "You didn't just save my plane, Miss Vance. You exposed a flaw in my own thinking, a blind spot I never knew I had. We're all so busy looking at the blinking green lights on the console that we forget to listen to the hum of the machine itself. We forget to listen to people." He slid a small, silver object across the table. It was a pair of captain's wings, the kind pilots receive when they first qualify. "I'm retiring next month. I can't sit in that seat anymore without thinking about what I almost missed. I wanted you to have these, a reminder. For both of us." Ilara picked up the wings. They were cool and heavy in her palm. It was the first time since that day that she felt a sense of closure, not of victory. It was a quiet acknowledgement of shared humanity, a recognition of flaws, both mechanical and human. That evening, she went to her father's office, a minimalist expanse of glass and steel overlooking the harbor. He was on a conference call, negotiating the final terms of the Apex deal. He wasn't crushing them. He was rebuilding them. When he finished, he turned to her. "Corrigan caved on the final point. We're taking a 40% stake. We'll refit their entire fleet, on our dime. New sensors based on your resonance diagnostics. New maintenance protocols. They'll be the safest airline in the world." "That's not enough," Ilara said, her voice quiet but firm. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "It's a $900 million investment, Ilara. It's more than enough." "You're fixing the machines," she said, placing Henderson's wings on the polished surface of the desk. But the machines weren't the only thing that broke that day. The people broke. The system broke. The crew, the captain, the police. They all followed their training, and their training led every single one of them to the wrong conclusion. They saw me as the flaw in the system. What good are new sensors on the wings if the people in the cabin have the same old blind spots? Marcus leaned back, studying his daughter. The frightened girl from the car was gone. In her place was a woman forged in the quiet fire of the last few months. "What do you propose?" he asked, his voice laced with respect. "I don't want to just fix the planes," she said, her conviction growing. "I want to fix the problem. We use the Apex settlement, our new partnership, to fund something new. An initiative, not just scholarships for kids from underserved communities, but a whole new way of training. We teach pilots, engineers, mechanics, and flight attendants to look for the human factor, to question their own biases. We create a program that teaches them that the most valuable diagnostic tool on any aircraft might be the perspective of the person you least expect. We teach them to listen for the resonance of doubt, to trust the intuition that runs counter to the checklist." Her eyes shone with a passion he hadn't seen since she was a little girl, explaining the aerodynamics of a paper airplane. The woman on that flight wanted my seat. She thought it was a symbol of power. She was wrong. A seat is just a place to sit. The real power was the ability to see what no one else could. Let's give that power to more people. Let's build an industry where no one is ever again considered an error in the system. 6 months to the day after the incident, Elara Vance stood at a podium in a sun-drenched hangar at Logan Airport. Behind her, a newly retrofitted Apex Air Starliner gleamed, its livery clean and bright. Her father stood beside the chastened CEO of Apex Air, a portrait of a new and unlikely alliance. In the front row sat 50 young, brilliant, diverse faces. The inaugural class of the Vance Aviation Safety and Perspective Initiative. 6 months ago, a few hundred yards from where we stand, a series of systems failed, she began, her voice steady, carrying through the cavernous space without a tremor. A mechanical system failed, threatening the integrity of an airplane. But before that, a human system failed, threatening the dignity of a person. I was told I didn't belong. The assumption was that I was an anomaly, an error that needed to be corrected. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the students. The great irony is that my very presence as an anomaly created the conditions to find the real one. The delay caused by the argument on the ground exposed the mechanical flaw that would have been fatal in the air. Prejudice is a hairline fracture in our judgment. It's a flaw we can't always see, but it vibrates through our actions, weakening the entire structure. It makes us blind to truth and deaf to warnings. Her eyes found the Starliner behind her. That aircraft is now the safest in the sky. It is equipped with sensors that can detect the slightest variance, the most microscopic flaw. It is a marvel of engineering. But our work is not to simply build better machines. It is to build better crews, better pilots, better engineers. To build a system of people who understand that safety isn't just about checklists and diagnostics. It's about perspective. It's about empowering the person who sees the world differently to speak up, and training the person in charge to have the wisdom to listen. She looked back at the inaugural class, at the future of aviation. The woman who confronted me wanted a seat. She thought it was her right. Today, we are not just giving you a seat. We are redesigning the whole cabin. We are building a cockpit with more windows. We are ensuring that the people who keep us safe in the air reflect the vibrant, diverse world on the ground. Because the greatest danger to any system is the assumption that it is perfect. The greatest strength is the voice that dares to say, "I think something is wrong." As applause thundered through the hangar, a powerful roar joined it from outside. The new Starliner, christened the Elara, began its takeoff roll. It lifted into the sky, a silver symbol of a crisis, transformed into progress, its wings catching the light. Elara watched it ascend, the scar of that day no longer a source of pain, but a compass point. It was a reminder that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to be the anomaly it cannot ignore, the unexpected variable that changes the entire equation. The sky was not a limit, it was a new beginning,